The series is sponsored by the Okrent and Bogdansky families in memory of Howard F. Okrent and Chaim Ben Dov, Zichronam Livracha. May we be blessed with good health and long life. Thank you very much, sponsors. Thank you, everybody, for coming, even though it's Thanksgiving. Or perhaps, this is your way of getting out of cooking. Also good. And may our learning be in the merit of the success of our soldiers and the wisdom of our leaders, and healing to everyone who needs healing, and the return of the final two hostages. Let's just see that everyone is muted, and we're going to get started. Okay, here we go. One moment. Fine. Yes, we want this. We want this. Okay, here we go. So last week we spoke about, okay, good, go away. Last week we spoke about security, right? And it's not Thanksgiving in Canada, UK, or anywhere but the US. It's so true. I am also not in a Thanksgiving place, but it's nice to celebrate. Okay, last week we talked about security, and this week we're going to look more at the human connection, right? The population. Who are the people who are coming to Eretz Israel? We've mentioned that we have these incredible, unbelievable, enormous numbers of Aliyah. And the question is, how did Israel absorb all these people? Who came? Why are they coming? And right, we're on the one hand, we're astounded. On the other hand, we're going to be somewhat disappointed because some of the stories are not good stories. But considering what Israel actually had to do, right, it's unbelievable what they were able to accomplish. The picture is a great picture. This was originally a black and white picture of a Yemenite Jewish family on their way to the transit point in the port of Aden. As you can see on the bottom here, when we talk about the Yemenites, talk about where they had to go, right? So they're not in Eretz Israel yet. They're making their way to Aden across the desert. It used to be a black and white picture, and somebody colorized it. But the other thing that was really nice is that the person who, I don't know if it was the same person, but somebody found out who these people are, right? Their great grandson, Avichai Cohen, identified all of the people in the picture, right? The patriarch and the matriarch, Chaim Zabib, and Suda Mazal, Suda Mazal, and the baby is Rachamim Geffen. Okay, this is the Zabib family. And it's just cool. We're going to see a lot of old pictures today, and it's kind of neat to think about, where these people are today, or more likely, where are their grandchildren today. Just to give us a little bit of numbers before we get started. Between 1948 and 1960, Israel absorbs almost 1 million immigrants. I will remind you that the Jewish population in 1948 is 600,000 Jews. Okay, so in the first 12 years of the state, we more than double our population. And in the first 2 years, right, between May 15th, 1948 and December 31st, 1951, there are 686,739 new immigrants. Okay, so there's really nothing like this in history. There's just a doubling of a population in such a short time. Not only that, right, we have immigrants who are coming from 70 different countries, 70, right? So also unbelievable language differences, culture differences, socioeconomic differences. How do we deal with this incredibly massive influx of people? And I'm just going to put the sources one more time in here. People want to have it in front of them, and that's it. I'm going to leave them aside. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so basic timeline. We always like to start with our timeline. Right? I started with Aliyah pre-state. Obviously, we could start with Aliyah. We could start with Avraham Avinu, but we're not going to do that. Okay? We're starting with Aliyah pre-state. Okay, which in some cases, we have the first Aliyah, the second Aliyah is ideologically motivated, but by the time we get to the 30s and certainly the 40s, a lot of the Aliyah is because of persecution. right, because of anti-Semitism, particularly from Europe. In 1933, with the rise of Hitler, you have the beginnings of what's called youth aliyah. Right, we'll talk about that. With the heavy restrictions that the British put on immigration, we have what's called aliyah bet, right, or ha'apala, right, ma'apilim, illegal immigration, illegal from the point of the view of the British. In 1939, the restrictions become even more severe, right, and Jews have to find their way in and to sneak their way in. Obviously, after the state is declared, it's a different situation, and as many people as we can absorb or we want to absorb can come in, and that's when we start having these mass aliyahs. 4950, we have something called al kanfei desharim, on eagle's wings, the mass Yemenite aliyah. In 1950, we have the law of return. We'll talk about that in a minute, right? The idea, the principle that Jews from anywhere can come and become citizens. 5152, we have the mass aliyah from Iraq, Operation Ezra Nehemiah, right? Referring back to Shivat Zion, thousands of years earlier. In 1950, we have the first Ma'abarot, the first transit camps. 50 to 60, we have development towns. We'll talk about what all these things are. 1961, we have the Eichmann trial. I put that here because part of our story is the huge influx of Holocaust survivors, and how they are treated and how they cope. I have to just stop this for a second because this is very strange to me why I'm sharing and I'm not seeing any people, and I'm having trouble with that. So I'm going to change what I want to do here. Okay, sorry for that. Um, Yofi from my current slide. Ah, there you all are. Hello. Okay, so, and finally, the last thing we're going to talk about a little bit is the story of the Yemenite babies, which is a story that has been ongoing in the state of Israel for a long time. 2021, there was finally a compensation agreement for some Yemenite families whose children disappeared. We'll talk about what that means. Okay, so that's just to give us kind of our big picture. Starting with Youth Aliyah. The heroine of Youth Aliyah is the woman on the left here, Recha Freier, Rebbitzin Recha Freier. Her husband was a rabbi in Germany. 1932, some Jewish kids come to her and say they lost their jobs because of anti-Semitism, because they're Jewish. Can she help them? Right? Small group, 12 kids. And she decides she doesn't want to help them to reestablish themselves in Germany. Let's get them to go to Israel. Let's create a program where we take young people and send them to Israel where they have a future. There's no future for them in Germany. She already understood this in 1932. She goes to the Histadrut. She goes to Ezra, the Jewish Orthodox youth movement in Germany. She goes to various, but nobody's interested. Right? Nobody's interested. She brings this first group of 12. She arranges for them to come by herself with no institutional backing. This beautiful picture over here is this first group, right, in Harod. But in 1933, with the rise of Hitler, suddenly the Jewish Agency wakes up and says, this is something we need to do, right? We better get involved in getting people out, and getting kids out is a great idea because we can send them the kibbutzim. The Moshavim will take them. They can be a labor force. And so the Jewish Agency becomes involved. The World Zionist Organization becomes involved. The person who is appointed to organize the whole thing is Henrietta Zold, who is a very important figure, obviously, in Hadassah, but she's also part of Youth Aliyah. But the person who's running it on the ground in Germany is Recha Freier. And she will do whatever she can to get these kids out. And being that she's on the ground in Nazi-occupied Germany, she really understands much more than the people in Israel or the people in America. She understands that you have to use unconventional and perhaps illegal methods, and this is not looked on with favor by the Zionist organizations or by Henrietta Zold. And despite the fact that she is involved in saving 7,000 kids and getting them to Israel. This is before the war, before and during the war. She herself manages to escape from Germany. She gets to Israel in 1940, and Henrietta Zold basically very unceremoniously dumps her. She says, "You're not in charge of Youth Aliyah anymore." I love Henrietta Zold, but this is definitely a mark against her. And Recha Freier, despite the fact that this is her idea and she's really the power behind it, she's basically forgotten for a long time. Today, people are learning her story, but Henrietta Zold kind of takes the limelight. But the more important thing is that during the war and before the war, 7,000 kids are saved. After the war, another 15,000 come to Israel. Okay, and we're talking about kids, teenagers, often the only survivors from their family, having to rebuild their lives. Not a simple thing at all. And that's a story in and of itself. Um, Illegal aliyah or aliyah bet, right, is sometimes what it's called as opposed to aliyah aleph, right? Aliyah aleph is legal channels, getting a certificate, being allowed. Aliyah bet is because the British are restricting the numbers very, very, very severely. The famous aliyah bet stories are the ships, right? The ships that come in clandestinely. Some of them make it in, some of them are captured, some of them, the most famous one, of course, being the Exodus, are sent back. How did it work, right? We won't go into the whole story. I'm sure a lot of people know the story. And if you don't, when you're in Israel, or if you're in Israel, definitely go visit Atlit, as well as the Ma'apilim Museum in Haifa. Amazing, amazing stories. But basically, you had ships that were gotten rented or bought in Europe, usually in terrible shape, cargo ships where tons and tons of people were just stuffed on board. Sometimes the captains were Jews, more often the captains were Italians, Greeks, people who were very happy to make a nice salary and to have a little adventure. And they would sail with trying to stay under the radar of the British and try to come in and land. Obviously, they're not coming into Haifa, right? They're not coming into the main ports. They're going to come in and land on a beach somewhere in the middle of the night. And they're helped in this by Paliam, right? Palmach radio operators. There are some Palmach people on the boats, Paliam people, and there are some on the shore in various kibbutzim, like Stot Yam, like Nitzanim, right? That are watching and are telling them when it's safe to come. And that's a lot of the story. Some Ma'apilim are coming by land, right? Often in very, very convoluted routes. And we have a few stories of Ma'apilim coming by air. Okay? And the picture on the right here is a plane. It's not the plane that was used, but it's the same make of the plane that was used in a really wonderful story. This is in Atlit. If you go to Atlit, they just added this plane a few years ago. And this is the story of an Iraqi clandestine aliyah in August and September of 1947. It has a great name. It's called Operation Michaelberg. Okay. Why is it called Operation Michaelberg? Because two American pilots made themselves known to the Haganah as being willing to borrow their plane and fly it on a mission that the Haganah chooses, as long as they get paid a nice amount of money. One of them was named Leo Vessenberg, and one of them was named Mike. All the sources say just Mike. I don't know, his last name didn't get recorded. So Michael Berg, right? That's the name of the operation. Shlomo Hillel, young guy involved in Aliyah Bet, goes to Baghdad with the pilots. They recruit, they manage to find 50 Iraqi Jewish teenagers. They secretly have to get to an airfield in the middle of nowhere. It's incredibly dangerous because if they're caught trying to leave to go to Israel, they will be executed. And it's really a daring do story. Daring do story. They manage to get to the plane. They manage to get on the plane. The plane takes off. It lands in a field near Yavniel by the Kinneret. And they weren't even allowed to say goodbye to their parents. They weren't allowed to say anything. They obviously couldn't take anything with them, but they came. Okay, and the pilots who weren't so inclined to do it again, but then, for the right price, they agree to do it a second time. And there are another 50 who are brought, and it also is successful. So we have some of these really amazing stories. But now we're getting more into the, we're a state, there's legal aliyah, and very, very early on, Okay, July 5th, 1950, or the Hebrew date is actually Herzl's Yortzeit. Okay, that's done deliberately. The Knesset passes one of its early laws, and that's the law of return. Right? Every Jew has the right to come to this country as an Oleh. Aliyah shall be Oleh's visa, and Oleh's visa shall be granted to every Jew who has expressed his desire to settle in Israel, unless he is engaged in an activity against the Jewish people or public health or the security of the state. Right? Certain people were excluded, as in people like Mayor Lansky, right, who was a big mobster, who came because he was wanted in America, but he was eventually deported, right? So not everybody was allowed in, but most people were allowed in. And this gets into very, very fascinating and disturbing questions of who is a Jew, right? 1970, this was kind of clarified to say all you needed was one Jewish grandparent, right? It's not a halachic definition. One of the really fascinating things, and I'm not going to go into this because this is not a halacha class, but one of the really fascinating things is that one of the people, the kind of person who is excluded is a convert. A Jew who voluntarily converts to another religion is not accepted under the law of return. Now, according to halacha, a Jew who converts, you can convert to 20 different religions. Halacha doesn't care. You are always a Jew, right? Yudihu. According to the state of Israel, if you are a convert, you cannot come and be absorbed under the law of return, right? Many more things to say about it, but we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it at that, I think. Sorry, is there anything I need to see here? Okay, moving on. Okay, where are they coming from? Okay, so I told you about Martin Gilbert's books last time. We're going to look at Martin Gilbert again. I apologize, poor quality. I just took a picture from my book, but I think you can get a little bit of a sense of it. So we want to do this one first. Okay, Jewish refugees and immigrants from Europe. This is going all the way from 1948 till 1970. So we don't need all of them, but I want you to notice some of the major places that Jews are coming from. Okay, we've got very, very large numbers from Romania. Okay, more than 200,000. Okay, obviously also very large numbers from Poland. Okay, 156,000. Bulgaria. Okay, 48,000. We have unusually very small numbers from the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is behind the Iron Curtain. Jews can't get out. Okay. Other countries, we have fewer, whether because fewer survived, unfortunately, like in Hungary, or because things were not as complicated, not as difficult. Okay, but those are our larger numbers from Europe. Okay, so we have lots of Jews coming from really Ashkenazi, very Ashkenazi places. Let's take a look at Jews coming from the Arab countries. Okay, and we'll see in terms of numbers also how they come, right? Are they coming all at once? Are they coming separated? But just to get a sense of the really large numbers. Okay, so we have this mass immigration from Yemen. It is a mass immigration, but the actual numbers are smaller than in other places. Okay, about 50,000 coming from Yemen. Yemen's a smaller country, plus we've already had Aliyah from Yemen pre-state. Iraq, also very nice number, 130,000. Morocco has the largest numbers, but it's a different thing than Yemen and Iraq, which is all at once, right? Mass Aliyah. Morocco is over the course of a few years, so it feels a little bit different. Egypt, of course, right? Last time we talked about Nasser and we talked about Sinai. Once Nasser comes to power, and even more so with the defeat of the Mivtza Kadesh, of the Sinai operation, Jews are essentially persona non grata in Egypt, and they get out, they leave, not all for Israel, but almost 30,000 of them come to Israel. To look at the numbers, right? And just to look at these numbers, I don't know, it can give you a headache. There are so many people. It's unbelievable, right? It really is beyond belief. But also just to give you a sense of who is coming when. Okay, so if you look at the first 2 years of the state, the earliest years, okay, the majority are Europeans, right? And this fits with the country, right? Today, Israel has a very, very broad range, a spectrum of Jews from all over. There's a very strong element of Mizrahi culture, much more so than like I know people who grow up in the United States or Canada are much less familiar with the Edot HaMizrach. Here, it's very, very dominant, but up until 1948, it really wasn't. We were talking about Ashkenazi Jews coming from Europe, and that increases with Holocaust survivors, right? 101,000 in 1948. That's not all, but many, right? More than 200,000 in 1949. A part of the immigrants in 1950. So we have Europe, 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 those first early years. Included in that, we have the mass aliyah from Yemen, the mass aliyah from Iraq. Okay, so that's giving us those first 3 years, this enormous, enormous number. After that, the numbers kind of spread out a little bit. And this is actually on purpose. Okay? The government, first of all, understands that they're in a difficult place. It's very hard, as we're going to see in a minute, to absorb these thousands every single month. Okay, but there's also, and this is another thing we're going to talk about, there's a very much a paternalistic attitude of who are the good immigrants and who are the less good immigrants. Hey, European Jews for sure fall under that good category. Yemenite Jews are considered to be very high quality, right, in terms of their tradition. It's a terrible thing to say, but this is what the government thought, hey, in terms of them being traditional and religious, and they're going to work hard. Moroccan Jews, North African Jews, there was a lot more suspicion about them, right? And many in the government were like, we don't want so many all at once. And that's why you're seeing it's very spread out in the 50s, where you have 24,000, 11,000, 18,000 a year, nothing like the numbers that we saw in the earliest years of the state. 1957, we have that influx from Egypt, okay, because of politics, from Iran in 1958. Okay, so it's just to give us a sense a little bit of the numbers. Sorry, going backwards. We don't want to go backwards. Why are they coming? Okay, so the Europeans are coming. That's not a very hard question to answer, right? If we want to talk about Europeans who are coming, in early Zionism, the first Aliyah, the second Aliyah, idealism, Zionism, nationalism, they really believe in this. The ones who are coming during and post the Holocaust, they may have been Zionist, but they may not, meaning they stayed on because they believed there was a future for themselves in the diaspora. And now they are Zionists Baal Korcham, right? They don't have a choice. They have to become Zionists because they see there is no place for them in Europe. They're coming because they need a home. They have nowhere to go. And we have many stories about Jews going back home after what they thought was home, if they survived, and pogroms in towns in Poland, right? Or their homes have been taken over and somebody else is living there. Where are they going to go? They don't have a lot of options. They might not be able to emigrate to America, so they're coming to Israel. They're coming because they understand that you need a Jewish army and a Jewish homeland to defend themselves. Hey, they might be coming out of a desire for revenge. We have, I'll just read you a quote here. So many of the survivors come and go straight into the army, right? Because they're needed. Certainly the ones who come before and during the War of Independence. And this is a quote from a survivor, a young man named Benny Wurzburg. And as he's swearing allegiance to the Haganah, he remembers standing powerless in front of the Nazi officers. And he says like this, לפיכך הרגשתי כי אין אני נשבע אמונים רק להגנה. I'm not just swearing allegiance to the Haganah, אלא נשבע כמה שבועות אחרות. I'm swearing a few other oaths. שבועת נקמה לדם הוריי הנרצחים וקרוביי המורעלים. An oath of vengeance for my murdered parents and my poisoned relatives. שבועה לנקום כבוד עמי הנדכא והמושפל. An oath to avenge the honor of my people, that my humiliated people. שבועה לנקום דמם של יהודים, and an oath to avenge the blood of Jews. ואז זו הפעם הראשונה הרגשתי כי לא שגיתי בזה שנאבקתי ונשארתי בחיים. This was the first time that I felt I didn't make a mistake by fighting and staying alive. Right? It's really it's a wild testimony. Jews from Arab countries. Oh, here's my same picture. Really should have changed it, but here you can see it in the black and white. Jews from Arab countries. The impetus is more complicated. There are situations of anti-Semitism. There's definitely growing anti-Semitism in the Arab countries, particularly when the state of Israel is declared. Even before that, in places like Iraq, right, there's a pogrom, the Farhud, already in 1941. Hey, Jews were never treated well in Yemen. There definitely are anti-Semitic reasons. There definitely are economic reasons. It's very hard to get by, to make a living for some of these diasporas, like Yemen. The Jews in Iraq, they were doing very well. The Jews in Egypt were doing very well until they lost everything. But there's also a trend, Jews coming from Arab countries, there is a sense of, but with some of them, there is a deep sense of redemption. This is what we've been waiting for. It's finally happening. Whether it's a feeling of the Messiah is coming or the end of history is coming, the time is coming. If we can make Aliyah, we must go. Okay, and we have various people talk about this. Rabbi Shlomo ben Harush, Moroccan, right? He writes a whole poem. And one of the things he says is, my wife objects because she's in her 9th month. Let's wait. He says, no, who knows, right? Maybe we won't have another chance. I feel bad for the wife. We have to go now. His friends say, but you have a good job in Morocco. He says, I don't care. I'm going to sell garinim barachov, right? I'll sell, nuts in the street, but I want to be in Eretz Chemdat Avot. So you have this kind of complicated motivations and different. I'm not saying everybody's the same, different countries, different populations, different things. The operation from Yemen, right? A few names: Operation Magic Carpet, Operation on Eagle's Wings. Could see this nice picture in the shuk of the eagle and the planes. Jews have to make their way to Aden, as we saw in that first picture. Aden is under British rule because the Yemenites, the Yemeni government will not allow Zionist representatives into the country. So they could only go to Aden. And Jews start streaming to Aden. The word passes, word of mouth, right? Amazing. No social media. People just start hearing that Aden is where we're going to go to the land of Israel. And they start coming even before anything's ready. Right? 1949, 1950, we have airlifts. The Jews are airlifted on cargo planes. Okay? 500 to 600 people per plane. Huge numbers. You could see a picture here, right, in the planes of just people just sitting wherever they can sit, getting off the plane. We have some really fantastic stories about this immigration. One of them is that Golda Meir, right, went to the airport once to meet one of the planes. And she sees these people getting off the plane, and there's old men, there's old women. She goes up to one of the old men and she says, were you frightened? Right? She understood. He's not only has he never been on a plane before, he's probably never seen a plane before. She says, were you frightened? He says, no, no, no. It's all in Tanakh, right? And I brought you here the pasuk in English, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. That's why it's called Al Kanfei Nisharim. Kovei Hashem echlifu koach, ya'alu ever kanisharim. Right? You're going to go fly on the wings of eagles. Okay, so it doesn't look like an eagle, but it's the same thing, right? He totally expected this to happen. Of course, it's going to happen. The Iraqi Jews, very different kind of a population. Okay? Iraqi Jews largely were middle class, were professionals, worked in the government, prosperous, felt very at home, much more urban than, let's say, Yemenite Jews. But 1941, there's a pogrom, the Farhud, right? In terms of numbers, nothing to compare to the Holocaust, but in terms of the shock of how is this happening in our country is very shocking. Life becomes very precarious, and there's a strong desire to get out and to make Aliyah. And a clandestine operation is organized by Shlomo Hillel, who we mentioned before. That's this guy over here, eventually becomes the Speaker of the Knesset. Mordechai ben Porat, this is him much older. They're both very young guys. They work out a deal with the Iraqi government. The Jews can leave, but they're giving up their citizenship. They can't take any property with them. And Israel pays cash for each immigrant that comes. Okay. And in 2 years, 123,000 Iraqi Jews make their way to Israel. Now, you have these huge numbers. Where are they going? Have them when the boat or the plane lands. Where are they going to go? Okay, the first stop for many of them, right, for more than 60% is what's called Shar HaAliyah. Okay, Shar HaAliyah is in Haifa. It's on the coast in Haifa. The original way that new immigrants would come in is that they would come, they would be processed. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And then after all this long processing, a very, very long day, they would be sent on a bus to an absorption center, to a Merkaz Klita. This was disorganized and also very, very, very exhausting, because what do they have to do when they get off the boats? Hey, they have to be sprayed with DDT to be disinfected, right? Sounds horrible, but they're coming from all over. They have to have a physical examination. They have to have vaccines. They have to get an ID card. They, all different kinds of things have to happen. It was a very long process. And so the government said, let's make camps, immigrant camps, okay, at the ports of entry. And they'll stay there for a few days. We'll process them and they'll move on. In theory, this is a very good idea. Uh, in practice, it was very, very, very difficult. Okay, these were old British Army camps. Okay, in the very first year, okay, from 1948-49, 114,000 people passed through one of these camps through Shar HaAliyah. Okay, you can imagine how crowded, dirty, right? People everywhere, all kinds of countries, languages, ages, everybody crammed together. No real place to do your laundry, no real place to wash. It's very, very, very difficult and untenable situation. And the question is, where are these people going to go? Right? So we have all these pictures. Some of them are really very heartbreaking, right? Like this woman surrounded by whatever is left of her possessions. Some of them are very hopeful. A lot of babies, a lot of children. Um, a lot of hope for a new life. And when you read accounts of these places, you hear a lot about, people sitting around, finding people from their countries, telling their stories, which often are horrific, particularly those of the Holocaust survivors, but also with a lot of hope for the future and what's going to come next and what's going to be. Now, where are they going to go? Right. So we talked last time about transfers of populations, right? And Arabs who are fleeing from various places as the Jews conquer them. So the earlier wave of immigrants, and that's largely the Europeans, although not only, right, are moving into either Arab cities like Ramla and Lud. This is a picture of the White Tower in Ramla. They're moving into neighborhoods in mixed cities like Katama, those beautiful, what we still call today Arab House, okay? In the picture on the right. They're moving into all these places that have been abandoned by the Arabs, but those places get filled up. What's going to be next? And these army camps are becoming worse and worse and worse. Not only are they crowded and dirty and just not a good situation, certainly not for families, for young people, but there's no work. So people are sitting around doing nothing, right? And along comes Levi Eshkol, who at the time was the head of the settlement division of the Jewish Agency. And he says, I know what we'll do. We're going to build temporary settlements and we're going to send people to work while the government works on building housing. And these are going to be called ma'abarot. Ma'abarot, literally ma'avar, right? It's a move, it's transit from one thing to the next. If you have never seen, and this is, I am plugging this right now because you must see this movie. If you've never seen Salach Shabati, go out right now, not right now, when this class is over, okay? Find out where you can stream Salach Shabati. It is a fantastic, fantastic movie by Ephraim Kishon, who is just poking fun at this whole idea and at all of the foibles of the government and what goes wrong and also what goes right. It's a very warm-hearted movie. But the Mabarot are complicated, right? It's not such a simple thing. Um, the people who are in charge on the ground, right? The infrastructure is set up by the Jewish agency, by the government, by people with all kinds of fancy sounding titles. Okay. But in reality, who's actually taking care of people's needs on the ground? It's mostly young soldiers. Right? It's mostly young soldiers who, men and women, who are kind of placed into the situation. And this is still the case today, right? We ask our young people, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, to really deal with incredibly difficult situations. The concept is called Rosh Gadol, right? You have to think big, right? Don't think small. You have to deal with things and you have to figure out how to solve problems. And even though every once in a while, right, the head of the Jewish agency is going to show up in a fancy car and be shown around, that's very nice. But you're out there, you're on the ground, you're dealing with issues. We have a great testimony of a young soldier who eventually becomes a writer. Her name is Shulie Tar-Even. And she writes about how it's just was an impossible situation to be put into. There's no infrastructure. In the rain, everything is flooded. In the summer, it's incredibly hot. Right? They evacuate people during a flood. They go back to see who's left. There's a baby who's left alone, who was just abandoned. The family says, "Oh, we knew the soldiers would come and find him and take care of him." The roads are not passable, right? They have to deal with all of the things that are going on the ground, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's taking care of kids. There's a lot of cultural bias. There's a lot of ignorance. Hey, one of the famous examples is, young women who are the nurses here, like you have in the picture here, who see, a Yemenite mother who's got 8 kids and is pregnant, and she says to her, "Why don't you use birth control?" Right? Very little understanding of the cultures that people are coming from. But there's also this feeling that we're pioneers, we're chalutzim, we're going to be able to do something that our ancestors were not able to do. Um, After we have the Ma'abarot, or in some cases at the same time or growing out of the Ma'abarot, we have the idea of development towns, right? Ayarot Pituach, development town for many, many years, and still in some places was very much an oxymoron. These places were not developed. They were very economically kind of mired in a very bad cycle. Today, most of the towns, even ones that are like really far off, like Yerucham, or Ofakim, are doing much better, are really expanding. Sderot is an example of a city that's really been transformed. But if you look at the map, right, a lot of them were meant to be in areas that were in the periphery and specifically on the border, right? Really on the border, whether it's the border of the Gaza envelope, right? Sderot, Netivot, Ofakim, whether it's on the border of the Green Line, right? Beit Shemesh, or Kiryat Gat or Kiryat Malachi, or it's the borders in the north. Okay, we talk about Kiryat Shmona and Carmiel and Ma'alot, meaning we want to find you a home. We want you to have a home. However, we also want you to be bodies on the border so that you'll increase the security of the state. We also want you, and we'll talk about this next time more, we talk about infrastructure and economy. We also want you to help grow food because we don't have enough food. We have taken on something enormous as the government, and you're going to have to be part of creating it. And part of that story is we're not really going to ask you if you'd like to be a chicken farmer on a Moshav Olim in Otef Aza. We don't care. You are going to be sent there because we need people to be there. Okay, so we have exceptions. Some immigrant groups got better treatment, but a lot of people were just told, "Get on the bus, we're taking you," right? In some cases, they're told, "We're taking you to Jerusalem," and instead the bus takes them to Dimona or Sderot, right? And they say, "This is not Jerusalem." You'll love it. You'll love it here, right? I'm saying this a little tongue in cheek, but it really is something that was, as we'll see, right, at the end, there's a lot of paternalism going on here. Um, okay, some very specific issues to talk about for a minute. We talked about how you have tens of thousands of survivors who are coming in these first early years. And it's the largest of all of the aliyot from a specific continent. In many ways, they're coming from very similar backgrounds to the founders, right? To the early Zionists, to the people who are in the government, to Ben Gurion and Levi Eshkol and Golda Meir, and right, they're all coming from this nice Ashkenazi background. However, first of all, same practical issues as everybody else. Where do you put them? What do you feed them? But second, there's a lot of emotional issues. What is the legacy of the Shoah, right? Both for them, gone through unspeakable trauma. Many of them lost so many of their family members, as well as how does Israeli society relate to them? Right now, one of the things that's kind of the flip side of, oh, well, we're coming from the same background, is that a lot of times you will have a family where the brother went to Palestine and the sister went to America and another brother stayed behind in Poland. I'm sure that I have many people on this Zoom. My family's like this, right? Where you had all those different experiences. And the ones who went to Eretz Israel, when the survivor stories or when the stories of the Holocaust start filtering to the land of Israel, the reaction of the Jews in Israel is, what do you mean? How could this be? You had troubles. Okay, we had troubles. We had our own enemies. We had Arabs. So we organized self-defense squads. We got weapons. We fought back. We patrolled at night. What's the matter with you? Why didn't you do that? Why did you go? And the quote, the famous quote, right? Why did you go like sheep to the slaughter? There was very little understanding of the realities of the Nazis, of the Holocaust, how impossible it was to predict what was going to happen. And so when the survivors come, there's really only one story that people want to hear, and that's the story of the brave ones, the resistors, right? The ones who physically resisted. We're not talking about spiritual resistance. That comes later. We want to hear about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We want to hear about the partisans. And that's why people remember going to Yad Vashem before the new museum was built. You walked in, you went down this lane of the trees of the righteous among the Gentiles. And at the end, what did you see? You saw this fantastic statue by the sculptor Nathan Rappaport, which shows the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto, who all look like Greek gods, right? This is what we want to look at. And what's next to it? A relief of the Gulistic Jews, right? The Jews who are being taken yet again into exile, beaten down, downtrodden, right? This is the feeling on the part of Israeli societies toward the survivors and the survivors themselves who don't really want to be reminded of this. And so they try to forge a new identity for themselves, even as they're remembering what they had at home, right? Aaron Appelfeld, very, very well known Israeli writer who was a child survivor, right? He writes about how he had a double identity. He says, I wanted to be a real Israeli, but I also had deep longings for my original home, right? And he says, we created for ourselves two worlds, right? An outer world and a hidden inner world. We'll see how there's a catharsis eventually at the end of this period. Part of the issues that are going on with repercussions of the Holocaust, and this I'm only going to mention because we really want to talk about it next time when we talk about the economy, the question of reparations, money that Germany is going to pay to the Jewish state. On the one hand, money that is desperately needed by us. On the other hand, and here you can see this picture at one of the rallies, here he is, Menachem Begin, right, in the opposition. Kvodenu lo yimacher bekesef, our honor will not be sold for money. Damenu lo yichupar b'schorot, our blood will not be atoned by merchandise. Nimchet HaCherpa, we're going to erase this shame of accepting the money. And like I said, we're going to talk about that later. You also had all kinds of stories about what did you do during the Holocaust. And that's where we get to this fellow, right? Kastner, Rudolf Kastner, who organized something called the Kastner Train, who managed to get Jews out of Hungary in return, cooperating with Eichmann. And there was a trial because he accused somebody of libel for telling the story and for calling him a collaborator. Very, very terrible event. And eventually he's assassinated. He's assassinated by people who believed that he was a collaborator. So we have all of these repercussions of the Holocaust. Um, the catharsis comes in 1961. Okay, 1961. Adolf Eichmann is captured in South America, right? One of these very daring Mossad operations. He's brought back to be put on trial in the land of Israel. Here he is in the glass box. This is happening, by the way, in Beit Ha'am, right? If you know Gerard Bahar Center in the center of Jerusalem, this is the first thing that happens there. It's basically built for this trial. And this trial is incredibly important in Israeli and Jewish history, not because of Eichmann, right? Not because of Eichmann. Okay, Eichmann got what he deserved. He was put to death. But what the trial did was that hundreds of witnesses were called, right? Not hundreds, 100 witnesses were called from all different countries. And they, for the first time, really told their stories. So you had like star witnesses, like Abba Kovner over here, right? It was one of the partisans, one of the leaders of the war of the Vilna Ghetto uprising, right? You had someone named Sivia Lubetkin, who was from the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, but you also had plenty of ordinary people, right? People who were in the camps, people who were in the ghettos, who suddenly told their story. This was televised, right? People could actually hear these stories that they never heard before. And suddenly there was more of an understanding. And this is really like just a sea change in how the Holocaust was perceived in Israel. The prosecutor, Gideon Hausner, began his first speech like this. When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I am not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point an accusing finger towards he who sits in the dock and cry, I accuse. For their ashes are piled up on the hills of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka and are strewn in the forests of Poland. Their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voice is not heard. Therefore, I will be their spokesman, and in their name, I will unfold the awesome indictment. I think today, when we are so suffused with Holocaust remembrance and trips to the camps and museums, it's hard to understand the impact that this trial had on Israeli society. And it really changed for many people how they viewed the survivors. Um, okay, let's shift a little bit. Um, we also have the issue of how Jews from the Arab countries were perceived. And there's definitely cultural bias against them. If we said, right, the leadership saw the European Jews and they understood where they were coming from, at least in terms of their culture, they do not get that with the Jews from Yemen and Kurdistan and Iraq and all these other places. They might have even seen them as somewhat desirable, like we said, the Yemenite immigrants, but they were certainly seen as primitive, right? Primitive in their customs, primitive in their dress, right? Primitive in their knowledge of the big world, right? And suddenly you have this huge influx of these Jews that we had no familiarity with before. And there's a lot of cultural bias against them. And they become known as the second Israel. Today, again, thank God, it's hard to really get this because today you have Jews from Arab countries, descendants of Jews from Arab countries who have reached the highest echelons in the military, in the government, in cultural things, right, all over. But this was not the case in the early years of the state. And that's where we get to this very difficult and very painful story. Um, there, for many years, right? From when the Yemenites start coming, we have stories about children disappearing, okay? Um, Taken to hospitals, taken to other places. When the parents come to find them, they're told that the baby died, right? And they have no records, they have no graves, they have no nothing. And nobody knows what happened. And there's a lot of conspiracy, right? There's a lot of thoughts about conspiracy. Were they sold and given or sold or given to Ashkenazi Holocaust survivors who had no children? Were they sent abroad to America, right? What happened to these children? There were, and we're talking about a few thousand cases. There were three different commissions of inquiry, one in 1967, one in 1988, and one in 1995. And the one in 1995 was made because of the fellow on the right. People who've been living in Israel for a while might remember this story. There's a guy named Uzi Mishulam. He was a Yemenite rabbi. He was deeply believed in conspiracy theory about the Yemenite children. He believed that they were stolen, that they were given away for adoption. He writes all these articles about it, and eventually he barricades himself in his house with followers and guns, and there's a whole standoff with the police. It's a terrible story, and in the wake of that, there's a commission of inquiry about this. All these three commissions came up with the same conclusion, which is that 80 to 90% of these missing children cases, we can show in the state archives that they died. Okay? They died. There was a lot of mix up in the camps. There was a lot of confusion. There were a lot of health issues. And there was a lot of not insensitivity. Okay? The conditions were terrible. Babies were separated from their families. Sometimes they were quarantined. And sometimes when they died, they were buried immediately. And nobody really had the heart to explain to the parents, to tell the parents there were too many people. Hey, the state archives were actually opened up so that anybody could look. The head of the archives at the time was somebody named Yaakov Lozowick, not at the time of the story, at the time of the last commission of inquiry. And he wrote a whole article about it. And he writes, there was no crime, but there was a sin, meaning insensitivity and just not caring enough about these children, right? Families wanted closure. There was no conspiracy, but there was just a lot of tragedy. Um, this attitude, this kind of second-rate attitude to the Mizrahi immigrants, eventually there's a backlash. In 1959, there are riots in a Mizrahi neighborhood in Haifa called Wadi Salib. Eventually, in the 60s and 70s, you have the Black Panther movement in Israel, which is Moroccan Jews fighting for equal rights, fighting for better conditions. That's less of our story. We're really at the time period of when things are very, very difficult. I guess really what I want to put together of all these different pieces is we have two very strong and opposing feelings going on. Hey, on the one hand, there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of idealism. Hey, it's so beautiful that we have this ingathering of the exiles. We are all Jews. We are all brothers. Hey, Yitzchak Ben Zvi, second president of Israel, Yitzchak Ben Zvi and his wife Rachel Yanaid Ben Zvi would host Rosh Chodesh gatherings in their home, right, in the president's home. Every Rosh Chodesh, they would have a different tribe of Israel, right? Jews from Yemen, Jews from Kurdistan, Jews from Iraq, Jews from Morocco, right? So that they could learn about their culture. There's enormous pride. Today we are beginning a series of Rosh Chodesh gatherings dedicated to the tribes of Israel, exiles from all the diaspora, first and foremost to immigrants from the diaspora of Yishmael, right, the Arab countries. And Ben Zvi was a historian. He really understood a lot about Jewish history. He had great respect for them. Our aspiration is to foster as best as we can the process of bringing hearts closer together between the tribes of Israel returning to the homeland. We intend to raise the sparks of light that are in each tribe to make them a heritage for the entire nation. So there is this enormous sense of pride. On the other hand, there is paternalism. There's a feeling that we are going to be a modern state. We need to have good human material. Everybody's got to follow the party line because we want to create good Israelis, right? There's a cartoon from the time, right? All these different people going into the machine, into the melting pot. So you can come out with your kova tembo and your shorts and, right, a little bit facetious, but that's the idea. And it reflects in how the immigrants' culture was treated, how their religion was treated. And we had stories in the early days of the Mahabharot. Yemenite children were told that they don't have to wear a tzitzit, they don't have to do mitzvot because now they're in the land of Israel, right? A lot of paternalism and difficult stories, really very difficult stories. And I really want to finish with two different things. One of them is a song, put it on for a couple of minutes, by a band that's called Awa. They are three sisters who are partly Yemenite. Their grandmother, their paternal grandmother, came in this, on eagle's wings, and was in a Mahabara, and she did not write this song. But they, as the grandchildren, who today have a very strong position in society, they wrote this song for her in Yemeni Arabic. Okay? And like I said, I'll play a little bit of it for you. But on the one hand, the land of wheat and barley, grape and olive, fig and pomegranate, date and home, right? The seven species. This is our home. On the other hand, you have a tent. You're going to be in a shack with four other families. You'll find a job in cleaning or working the earth, right? This isn't Yemen anymore, right? I came to you as a stranger. You saw me as primitive. I came to you fleeing. I saw you as a last resort. So I'm going to put it on for a moment. Let's see if it'll work. This is always my problem. If it's going to work, hold on. I'm going to give it a shot. No, why not? Where is my other? Is it still open? Hold on. Hold on. Yes, okay. This is where we get to the technology, folks. It's complicated. Oh, why is this not here? Okay, I'm gonna play it. You'll tell me if it's gonna
Do
work.
it. Surely you can do it.
What? I can do it?
You can do it.
Thank you. Thank you for the vote of confidence. All right, let's see if it works. You might be able to Are we hearing anything?
Not yet. Not yet.
All
You have
right,
to,
all right.
did you,
Hold on, hold on. One more try, one more try. If it doesn't work, I'll send you all the link and you can watch it yourselves.
You'll sing,
Um,
you'll sing it.
okay. Ah, here we go. Here we go. All right. Share sound, video sharing. Yeah, now it's good.
we can hear.
Okay. You can watch the rest of it on YouTube, but I do want to go back to one last thing, right? So we really were talking about complicated, very complicated, but I wanted to finish with Miriam Peretz. Okay? Miriam Peretz she's an amazing woman. She lost two sons in various wars. She was given the Israel Prize in 2018 for her work just in talking to people and soldiers. She's a really amazing woman, and she tells this great story. Right, I'm going to freely translate as I go. You can read it in Hebrew. She says, one of the nights of summer 1963, my father said that tonight the Messiah would come. When I asked how I would know who he is, he said he'll wear an open shirt, shorts, and he's going to wear sandals. I met the Messiah, the messenger, the emissary from the Jewish agency who was sent into the Malach in Casablanca, into the ghetto in Casablanca, where I lived till I was 10, and brought us to Jerusalem, meaning to the Ma'abara of Chatzerim in Beersheba, where I lived until 1969. We lived without gas, without a refrigerator. The beds were made out of metal and the difficulties of absorption and a new language. But there was great joy that we had managed to come to Eretz Yisrael, that we had the zchut to come to Eretz Yisrael. I learned to love the land through the songs from a radio that my father got as his job, part of his job as a street sweeper. Every Wednesday, I would wait in holy anticipation at the doorway to our hut with in my hand a notebook and a pencil, ready to write the words of the songs that were going to be taught by Effi Netzer on his show. And that's how I learned about the Chermon through Malchut HaChermon, about Beilechem from Re'i Rachel Re'i, and about Emek Israel from Shir HaEmek, right? So she doesn't say it was all wonderful. It wasn't all wonderful. It was very difficult, but there was hope, there was love, and really, I guess what we can finish with is, right, here's the Aliyah Chadashah, right? Israel says it's a little heavy, but nice, right? Did we make mistakes? We definitely make mistakes. Some people would say the mistake of accepting all of these people at once. We wanted so many people. Maybe we should have gone more slowly. Did we treat people not always in the best way? 100%. Did we give hundreds of thousands of people a safe haven, a home, a dream in 12 years? Definitely. Okay, so there were many problems, there were many wonderful things, and like everything, it's a complicated time period. Okay, let's take a look at chat. Anything important? Sorry. Okay. Yes. Oh, more Thanksgiving. Okay, I'm sorry. My goodness, too much Thanksgiving. I should never have said anything. Okay. Israel has approved a plan to take the last 5,800 B'nai Menashe. Oh, very nice. Another aliyah. Classifying the immigrants seems to be Jeremiah's two baskets. But yeah, this has been going on throughout Jewish history. What am I going to tell you? It's true. Was a limited and prolonged aliyah from Morocco due to Israel actually limiting them? And not, yeah, no, they really did limit them. They really did. They didn't all want to come to Israel. That's 100% true, right? They did go to France, etc., etc. But the government also did limit them. Okay. Yes, there are also all kinds of diseases, right? Ringworm, different things like that. And many of these things are being talked about now, right? And are being dealt with now. Holocaust survivors came from Czechia, right? They were sent to a moshav, right? You didn't get to choose. My friend's Yemenite father was the one who hung Eichmann. Oh my goodness. Wow. I watched Trial from School, right? All these great memories here, or not great, but important. Yes, there was a grave that was open. There was a famous study. There were a couple of other DNA. There are cases. I'm not saying it was 100%, but there were cases that things were messed up. And you have to realize also, we're talking about the 1950s, right? even today, we got hostage bodies back, and it wasn't clear where they, right? And we had to do DNA testing. They didn't have such things, right? It was not so simple. Our guy said, yeah, Lul, right? That's also, but that's very short, but 100%. Immigrants, the latest immigrants always have the hardest times. Okay, the movie is Salach Shabati. Salach Shabati. Chaim Topol, the great, Alav Shalom. And so here, let's see. All right, I don't know where you can see it, but you must see it. It's the best. So that's Salach Shabati. The video is by a group called Awa, the Chaim sisters, and it's called Hanya Mashhu Al Yaman. They also have a lot of other great songs if you like that kind of song. Okay, thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and we will meet again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was great.
Thank you very much, Shabbat Shalom.
Wonderful.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
That's hard. Bye.